Hello Year 10, welcome to this week's biology lesson. There is just one PowerPoint or video this week, and this is covered on pages 212 to 213 in your biology textbook and is entitled Inherited Disorders. So please use this presentation that Mrs. Miles Williams takes you through to learn about how to use Punnett squares to show how recessive and dominant characteristics are passed on in the form of inherited conditions. And please also, can you make sure that you've gone back over all of the comments that I have sent you on Show My Homework, where I have uploaded your marked piece of work every week. You can use that piece of work to either print it and keep for your records, or to green pen the piece of work that you've got at home, particularly if you've handwritten it. You can use my feedback to help you to green pen it. The piece of work I'm setting you for this week is some more exam questions, so see how you get on with those. As always, drop me an email if you need any support. Best wishes. Bye.
This week we're going to be looking at how some disorders are inherited. So you might know some people who work in the scientific industry, you may not. Think about who you do know and how they might use their knowledge of inheritance and how they might use that and why. And think about whether you know anyone who works in one of these jobs. If you know me, you probably do, because I used to work for GlaxoSmithKline just up the road, and I worked there for quite a long time before I became a teacher. And some of the projects that I worked on were involved with diseases that were inherited. Okay, so let's just do a quick mind dump, if you like, about what we know about inheritance. So make yourself a little mind map on your page and just fill in some of those boxes of all the things you can remember. You really need to know a lot of keywords for this unit, so see if you can recall as many as you can. Pause the slide now and have a little think about that, please. Okay, so we are nearing the end of the unit. We're looking at inherited disorders today. We've just got one more lesson after this. We have already dealt with sex determination, so it won't be that one. Okay, so let's continue today. We need to be able to describe what an inherited disorder is, explain key terms to do with inheritance and how those characteristics are determined, and again make genetic cross diagrams, Punnett squares, in order that we can make predictions. Now we've got a few keywords down the bottom there. Some of those are new. We've got disorder, inherited, alleles, all of those we've come across before. Polydactyly we haven't, and cystic fibrosis we haven't. Okay, those two are the conditions that the exam board are likely to test you on. They're the ones that are defined as being what you need to know about. Recessive we have come across before. Okay, so let's think then about how these characteristics are inherited again. So we've been learning that we inherit our DNA from our parents, and remember that the genes are a short section on that entire DNA molecule that we inherit from our parents. Okay, so just a small bit. So one gene might determine a particular characteristic, and different characteristics resulting from that gene will be due to having different alleles. Okay, so each of those alleles is going to code for a different protein, and it's the alleles themselves that determine which characteristics you have. Remember, we talked about eye colour. If you have an allele from each parent that gives you blue eye colour, then you will have blue eyes. But if you have one blue, one brown, you will end up with brown eyes. Okay, so we're going to go through those keywords again. You can pause the slides here and write them down, or you might have done this last time, so you may not wish to, but we're going to go through those keyword definitions again because they are really important. Okay, so first one, dominant means that the phenotype is going to be expressed even if you only inherit one of those alleles. So again, eyes. If you inherit an allele from one parent for brown eyes, you are going to have brown eyes regardless of what you inherit from the other parent. Recessive. You're only going to have that characteristic, say blue eyes, if you inherit the same allele from both of your parents, so you have two copies. Homozygous, remember homo meaning the same, means that you have identical alleles for a particular characteristic. So again, we could say that someone with blue eyes is homozygous for eye colour because they have two blue alleles, one inherited from each parent. Heterozygous, hetero meaning different, means that the alleles are different for that particular characteristic. So if you have brown eyes, you might be brown-blue. Okay, so you're heterozygous for eye colour, you have one brown allele, one blue allele. Genotype tells us the alleles present in an organism for a particular characteristic. So going back to that previous example, if you have brown eyes and you also have a blue allele, you will be big B, little b. That is your genotype. Phenotype is the physical appearance dictated for that characteristic by the alleles. So in this case, eye colour. So your phenotype would be brown eyes. So, okay, not only is eye colour determined by different genes, but also characteristics like having attached or detached earlobes and also having various different nose shapes can be controlled by one or more genes. You need to be able to draw Punnett square diagrams or Punnett cross diagrams or genetic diagrams to show how those particular characteristics might be inherited, and you need to be able to work out the chances of having any of those particular characteristics. You've done this last week, so we should be getting a little bit more confident. Hopefully you had some examples in your homework as well to help you with doing that. Alright, so today we're going to look at these two disorders that I mentioned before. They were on the keywords. We had cystic fibrosis and polydactyly. So cystic fibrosis you may or may not have come across, but it's a disorder of the membranes inside your lungs. Okay, and the disorder is caused by a recessive allele. It's going to affect lots of your organ systems as well as your lungs, but we tend to think of it initially as being in the lungs, and that means that some of the substances inside of your lungs cannot cross through the membranes and enter your bloodstream because cystic fibrosis causes the surfaces to become very, very sticky. Okay, people who have cystic fibrosis do have a little bit of a problem in their lives in that they need to have lots of physiotherapy because they have this horrible sticky solution inside their lungs. So literally they spend hours and hours having their lungs emptied, and that's simply through bashing them or patting them on their backs very firmly. Okay, it is improved by carrying out lots of exercise, but you can imagine this is quite difficult for them because if you think the process through, if you're not absorbing the substances through your lungs, the alveoli, you're reducing the amount of oxygen that's going to get to your muscles. Okay, so that kind of thing is exercise is going to be more difficult than it would be for a normal person, somebody who has not is not suffering from the condition. Okay, so capital C we're going to call a non-cystic fibrosis allele, so that's the dominant allele, and lowercase c is the recessive allele and could result in a person having cystic fibrosis. So if we look at some parents, a pair of parents, two individuals have got the following genotypes. The mother is big C, little c, and so is the father. Okay, so what would the genotype what would the phenotype of both the mother and the father be? Have a little think about that. Okay. Right, we know the genotype is big C, little c. We know that cystic fibrosis is a recessive condition. So in order to show the condition, so in order to have cystic fibrosis, you need to have two copies of the recessive allele. So you would be small c, if you had the condition yourself. So the phenotype of the mother and the father is that they do not have cystic fibrosis. They are both, however, carriers in this case. Okay, so what I want you to do is make a Punnett square now and calculate the percentage chance of their children having cystic fibrosis. So pause the slide here and just do that quickly. Okay, hopefully you've come up with a result. This is what your Punnett square should have looked like. Okay, so we've got the female across the top and the male down the side, denoted by their sex chromosome genotype, XX for the female, XY for the male. Okay, and if we insert the answers into there, you can see we've only got one square where we have small c, small c. Okay, in the exam they might ask you to identify the offspring that would have cystic fibrosis, and you would be expected to draw a circle around that small c. Because it's a recessive condition, we have 2 copies of the recessive allele, which means that that offspring will unfortunately suffer from cystic fibrosis. Okay, so looking at our ratios, big C, they're not even a carrier. Okay, they've been lucky. They've inherited the allele from both parents that does not carry the cystic fibrosis condition. So the ratio there for big C is 1 in 4. For big C, little c, and you can see that in this Punnett square diagram, one of the boxes has big C, little c, and one has little c, big C. It doesn't really matter which way around you have them. You will not lose any marks in the exam if you do them one way or the other around. Okay, and one of the boxes has little c, we've already talked about. The chance of having cystic fibrosis is 1 in 4. So out of a total of 4 offspring, one of those is likely to have cystic fibrosis. But remember, this is all about chance. It wouldn't necessarily happen. Even if this couple had 8 children, they might not have a child with cystic fibrosis, but there is a high likelihood that they would at least be carriers. Okay. So change those into percentages for me now. Okay, and you should have had no cystic fibrosis, 25%, being a carrier, 50%, and having the condition of cystic fibrosis should also be 25%. Okay, next one we're going to think about then is polydactyly. You may or may not have heard of polydactyly, I don't know. So here are a couple of images of people with polydactyly. You can see the top one, there are 6 fingers on both of the hands of this person. Quite often it is the little finger that you get an extra one on, but it doesn't have to be. And in the bottom image there is a picture of somebody with really a rather excessive number of toes. If you look on the internet you'll be able to find dozens and dozens of pictures that show you what polydactyly might look like. It's a disorder that causes you to have additional fingers or toes. Okay, and this is caused by a dominant allele, and that means that you only have to inherit it from one of your parents in order for that to be passed down the line. Okay, quite often when a baby is born with the additional fingers or toes, they are removed soon after birth. So they're tiny, so they just kind of clip them off. A surgeon will do that. There are other more serious diseases and conditions, however, which are caused by a dominant allele, things like Huntington's disease, which is a condition that will develop later on, so you won't see it from birth, but it will develop in middle age, and it affects your nervous system and can eventually, well, will eventually lead to death. Okay, so here we have the genotype and the phenotype for polydactyly. So the genotype can be capital P, it's dominant, remember, so capital P, the person will have polydactyly, and even if they only have one copy of the gene, so one allele that is the polydactyly allele, big P, little p, they will still have polydactyly. In order to not have it, you must have both of the recessive alleles, so little p. So if we've got 2 parents that have the genotypes, father is big P, little p, and mum is little p, we're going to construct a Punnett square diagram and have a look at the likelihood of the offspring having polydactyly. And then I want you to write down the ratios as well for each of the different conditions. Okay, let's pause the slide and have a go at that, please. Okay, now let's try that again. You'll see there's just been a slight change in the genotypes of the parents. Here we have the father that is big P, and mum, that is little p. I want you to make those Punnett square diagrams again, and again work out the likelihoods of each type of genotype resulting in the offspring. So hopefully now you can apply your knowledge and explain how polydactyly and cystic fibrosis occur as conditions through inheritance. Okay, and what you're going to have a go at next is a short question. Okay, so a recessive allele causes syndrome D. Quite often what the examiner will do is use your knowledge of certain conditions like polydactyly or like cystic fibrosis, but they will apply it to a new condition, and here they've just made something up. Okay, syndrome D, doesn't really matter what it's called, the same principles always apply. Okay, so we have a heterozygous man and a homozygous recessive woman who want to have a baby. Construct a Punnett square diagram to determine the probability of the baby having syndrome D. Identify any children with syndrome D and use the following symbols: capital D for dominant, lowercase d for recessive. It's always the capital letter for the dominant, it's always the lowercase letter for the recessive. Okay, pause the slide and just have a go at that. For marking point 1, you should have got the father's genotype correct, big D, little d. You should have got the mother's genotype correct, little d, little d. You should have derived the offspring correctly. That means you need to have filled in the boxes correctly based on the mother and the father's genotypes. And you need to have identified that child, that potential child, with the syndrome by putting a circle around it. And for the final marking point, you needed to have given the chance of having the syndrome, so 0.5, 50%, or a 1 in 2 chance. Okay, so your teacher will set for you now an exam question to do with the inheritance of these or other conditions. And we're just going to go on finally to go over the Punnett squares from earlier in the lesson, which I will display for you now. Finally, let's see if we can add any more bits of information to our brain dump that we did earlier. Okay, spider diagram, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so there should be a few more things that you can write on there to complete the lesson. Okay, if you want a little bit of a stretch and challenge activity, if you've got quite a high target grade, you might want to write a short piece on what it would be like if there were no inheritance in the world. Okay, so a little bit of a far-reaching question that goes into all sorts of other subjects, doesn't it? All right, thank you very much. In this example, the genotype of the mother is small p, so that's the recessive allele, and the father is big P, little p, so he is heterozygous. We produce this Punnett square. So the mother across the top, small p, and the father down the side, big P, little p, and in 2 of those squares we have the dominant allele displayed, meaning that there is a 50% chance of any offspring having polydactyly. In this example, where the mother is homozygous for the recessive allele, small p, and the father is homozygous for the dominant allele, we produce this Punnett square. Okay, and as you can see, every one of the offspring choices has a small p and a large P present, and therefore there is a 100% chance of the children having polydactyly.